day and good evening, our friends. Welcome to another of our weekly program, Straight Talk. This week, we will be speaking about, once again, the situation in Guyana, which is constantly evolving in a direction which many people find worrying, if not unpredictable. We call this a messy situation. Now, this is a situation which, of course, we do not appreciate, nor are we proud about, or are we proud to talk about. Any messy situation in any country is something to be rejected, is something not to be encouraged. But we are not unique in this situation. There are many countries around the world which experience messy situations from time to time. For example, you may have seen almost on a daily basis the situation in a country called Hong Kong, where almost on a daily basis protest demonstrations are taking place, wreaking havoc in the economy and in the lives of people across the board in that country. There are many other countries that experience situations like this from time to time. And in that respect, we are no exception. But the fact of the matter is that while we are part, that is to say Guyana is part of the global community, we have to think locally and act globally, or as some say, act locally and think globally. In other words, we in our country cannot consider ourselves isolated from what is happening on the international arena. In that respect, it is extremely important that the messy situation which Guyana finds itself at this point in time is quickly removed and eradicated. This messy situation is where Guyana is in right now. And there are only two ways in which it could come out of this situation. One is that the people themselves must take action, and the international community must also be involved in one way or the other, without, of course, interfering in the internal affairs or the domestic affairs of the country. What does a messy situation mean? What are the elements that characterize a messy situation? A messy situation is characterized by certain features, one of them being corruption. Corruption in Guyana is becoming almost a household word. Almost in every facet of social, political, and economic life, you hear people talking about rampant corruption in our country. It has reached to such an extent that it is now like a cancer eating at the sinews of our society. This, of course, is something which we need to remove, which we need to reject. And only a new government that is bent and has a strong anti-corruption policy can remove this scourge from among the Guyanese nation. The other element that constitutes an element of corruption or of the messy situation is squandermania. Squandermania means spending money on issues which are not of great importance or significance for the development of the country. There have been a number of projects on which money have been spent by the APNU-AFC, which has brought no benefits whatsoever to the nation and to the people. Let's take, for example, the Durban Park Stadium. do we really need such a stadium when in fact we have the national park that has traditionally been used for national events such as fundraising or flag raising activities? We also have the cricket stadium at Providence, which can also be used for similar events. So that the construction of the Durban Park Stadium, or whatever you may want to call it, was totally unnecessary in a country where similar facilities exist in other countries and where something like that was hardly needed. There's also the question of more recent vintage of the house-to-house registration, where billions of dollars have been spent on an exercise that had been brought to an end before it should have concluded. So that the GECOM, or the Guyana Elections Commission, has spent huge or humongous sums of money on the house-to-house registration, which was not necessary at all, because many of the people who they registered or re-registered are people who are already on the National Register of Registrants and the voters list. That is another clear example of squandermania. Another factor that constitutes this messy situation is something called nepotism. Nepotism is when the government, ministers in the government and associates of the government begin to employ friends and family in government agencies and departments. Almost on a daily basis, we hear that ministers, permanent secretaries, and other high-level government officials are employing friends, relatives, and others in those sections where they have responsibility for. This is called nepotism. So that this whole question of friends and family being employed because of political connections is something that we must abhor and which we must totally reject and root out from the society. Once again, this can only be done with a change of government. Now we have the big question before the nation of elections. Still on a daily basis, the country is being held in suspension, so to speak, or in suspense in respect of the date for calling elections. The foot dragging continues. And this, of course, is not a situation that is favorably looked upon by people from all walks of life, including those in the government and including the supporters of the APNU-AFC. This foot-dragging exercise on the part of government to prolong their life in government is totally unconstitutional and should have been dealt with ever since the Caribbean Court of Justice made its ruling. But lo and behold, what we have is an administration that clings to government as though it is clinging to life. Next, we have a government that should have resigned long ago. The president, the cabinet, should have gone ever since the passage of the no confidence motion. This is all part and parcel of the foot-dragging exercise that the country is currently experiencing and which the Guyanese people have become totally fed up over. Recently, the former Attorney General, Mr. Anil Nandalal, has moved to the courts, to pronounce on the legality of the president still holding office. That is a matter that is currently occupying the attention of the courts, and sooner rather than later, the judge will rule on the legality or the constitutionality of the president and his cabinet holding office up to this point in time. The country also is experiencing a situation which is described, as I said, as a messy situation where the parliament is not meeting. Parliament has not met since December of last year. Only in January there was a brief meeting of the parliament where the APNU AFC asked the speaker whether the no confidence motion was legal, and the speaker rejected their appeal and told them yes, it was legal. But since that time, the parliament, which is the highest deliberating body in our country, where laws have to be passed, where policies have to be hammered out, is not meeting. And this is not a good sign for any democracy. We notice, for example, that in the United Kingdom, the present Prime Minister suspended, with the permission of Her Majesty the Queen, the Parliament. Mr. Boris Johnson is now under fire for suspending the Parliament, which there has been a wide outcry, a huge outcry by the British people about such an act that goes against the grain of democracy in the United Kingdom. Similar situation obtains in Guyana, where no confidence motion called for the resignation of the government and for Parliament to be dissolved and new elections called. But this has not happened. Characterizing the messy situation in our country is the business community that continues to live as dead as possibly can be. Businessmen continue to complain, and notwithstanding their Herculean efforts to make a profit, nevertheless, the business community is as dead in the water as it can be. Finally, we have the Constitution, which this government continues to trample on, whereas the Constitution should have been upheld based on the rulings of the Caribbean Court of Justice. The government continues to willy-nilly trample on the Constitution of our country, which is totally unacceptable. This is part and parcel of the messy situation that we're experiencing. Lack of transparency, no accountability are major features of this messy situation. And as I said before, this is not a situation that we are proud about. No one, not a single Guyanese would want to be living in a messy situation. So my friends, I call upon you to pay attention to the developments in our country. I call upon you to reject this messy situation, to play your part in order to ensure that the mess is cleaned up and that a new government is put in place so that every Guyanese man, woman and child would be able to live in a healthy, wealthy environment to the benefit of all. Thank you, and until next week, let us meet again for another Straight Talk program. Thank you.